Hey everyone, and welcome to this Risky Biz product demo. My name's Patrick Gray, and joining me today is James Pope, who is the Director of Technical Marketing Engineering over at Corelight. And this, of course, is a sponsored video. All of these demos are, and Corelight has sponsored the Risky Business podcast for a number of years. And they're a really interesting company. So they maintain Zeek, which is formerly Bro, which is the sort of InfoSec discipline's de facto standard for collecting network security information, right? So a lot of people use the Zeek sensor to send information to a SIEM. Often they will license Zeek to like companies that do XDR, things like that. And they also have their very own NDR product, which is a relatively recent development. Historically, Corelight would sell appliances that can do, 100 gigabit per second, full capture and analysis, which is pretty crazy. But this move to NDR is more of a push into the regular enterprise market. So yeah, James, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And I believe you're going to show us a couple of things. You're going to show us your NDR product, but you're also going to start off by walking us through the actual Corelight sensor and like what you can do with it, even outside of just, getting a full end-to-end turnkey solution from Corelight, right?
So Corelight, we call ourselves an open NDR, right? We let you control the data, send it to where you want. We are the maintainers of Zeek. We implement Suricata, right? So we have a lot of community and a lot of past history, as you covered. And we try to take that information and turn it into actionable detections to speed up investigations, right? And as you were mentioning, that could be a sensor that's a 2 gig to 100 gig single 1U sensor, or maybe your cloud or multi-cloud or hybrid. We got options for all those things to help you maintain that visibility and that security posture from wherever you are. Yeah, let's start with the sensor real quick. And we have the option of these sensors, as he was mentioning. We have a single 1U appliance. It can go from 2 gigs to 100 gigs, but we have virtual appliances, cloud appliances. If you're multi-cloud, we got options to help organizations accomplish those tasks. And not only do we just try to make Zeek easy and bring in detections from Suricata, it's your data. You own it. Where do you want to send it, right? We have our own tool investigator. So if you don't have one, or you don't you want to have a separate place to just look at NDR things and maybe only send alerts to your SIM, we got you covered. If you don't want another pane of glass, yet another pane of glass, you don't need it. You can absolutely take this data and send it to your existing environments. We have exporters for Splunk and Elastic and Logscale and Snowflake. If you want to do data lakes, take that, and we got default JSON exporters that you can tune and ship that data wherever you want. But yeah, we just try to make Zeek easy. Instead of trying to load packages, just turn them on, check a box, let's go.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. It's a lot, just right there. But yeah, I mean, basically you can just, that's the power of Zeek, right? Is that it's like the Swiss Army network, sensor.
Yep, and it's open source. You can extend it, you can improve it, and we do a lot of that. And we have some of our own enrichments and things that make things substantially easier for customers. And I think what I'd like to do is let's start in like a customer's SIM. Let's go look at it from that vantage point. And then I want to compare it to our investigator and some of that value add of making things easier. Does that work?
That absolutely works for me, yeah. Because I mean, so often, and it's so funny that you actually just mentioned the whole pane of glass thing, right? Because everybody's got a single pane of glass. And at that point, when you've got 10 of them, it's not a single pane of glass anymore. But, what I've noticed over the last few years is quite often people will be pumping stuff into a SIEM, but when they get something interesting, that's when they might open up something extra like, your investigator or whatever and drill down a bit deeper. So, but anyway, walk us through it.
Yeah. When I was a SOC analyst, I had 16 different screens I had to deal with, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's up to that org. Where do you want to send it? So in this case, we're looking at Crowdstrike's, it's called Falcon Logscale. And what we have here is Corelight logs stitched with Falcon EDR logs. So both of these together. So this is a scenario where if the customer wants our data to go into their existing workflow, existing environment, that correlation that turns it into that magical SOC triad or whatever that might be, you have the option of, we have some, it's called community ID and a few other things that we can make it so that this data is together and interlaced. And if you want to get to the nerdy bits real fast at the bottom, it looks like this. Here's a log from us, here's a log from Falcon. And it's the same thing for the same endpoints being looked at the same time.
Well, is this data being ingested into CrowdStrike?
Correct. CrowdStrike's
Wow.
Logscale.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I did not know that there was I mean, I knew people were integrating sort of like their EDR and NDR data. I just didn't know that CrowdStrike actually had a product that would do that for you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they have apps that brings Corelight right in, and then we have a community ID. It's a little bit of nerdy bits. It's open source. You can go just Google community ID in GitHub, and you're going to see the nerdy details. I'm happy to get into there if we have time, if you want. But what it does essentially just stitches them together. It knows that these are the same 5 tuples of these hosts. So even if you have a time drift or NTP, you have a clean correlation.
Yeah, nice. I mean, this is like, I guess, that whole App Store kind of vibe that CrowdStrike's been pushing the last few years. It's just nice to actually see it doing cool stuff like this.
I mean, every SIM vendor typically has an app store, and we have an app in that store to bring in our data to analyze and parse it. So
totally. I mean, I'd expect that from Splunk. I've just never, and the like. I just never would have thought of CrowdStrike as a SIEM vendor. But I guess it's 2024 already, so here we all are. No, that's very cool because I mean, I think that's something to remember is that NDR combined with EDR logs, very powerful stuff.
Exactly. That's much powerful. I love EDR and I love NDR. There's some strengths in each one of those. So at the top here, we're seeing Corelight notices. Notices are things that are coming from typically a Zeek back. So they're called Zeek notices, but then we have some of our own value add on there, right? So we call these Corelight notices. And then we have a second section here that has Suricata. So we take Suricata alerts and we take our notices and we can stick them together, right? So here's the power of you're good at Suricata and there's rule tuning here, or maybe you're better at writing Zeek scripts and doing detections there. And they have different value adds based on the analyzers that are inside of them, right? DCP, RPC for Zeek versus, Suricata for other things, right? So and just a quick level set there, that's our Suricata alerts. And then we have all of our Falcon alerts. So anything coming out of CrowdStrike Falcon EDR, here's all of their alerts together and we just combine them. And this is very similar to a lot of customers. They will have this dashboard or different types of dashboards that they have built to do this with multiple tools, right? We're just showing you real quick their EDR and our NDR. So if I was doing this investigation, right, we have these alerts coming in. What do I want to do next? I would find something that's interesting or compelling to me. In this case, I have this observed by PowerShell at the very top. I'd want to pivot into that. And by using that community ID pivot, it keeps stitched logs together. I continue to have my EDR logs tied with my NDR logs, and I'm able to see a bigger picture, right? So we see, and from our side, we have a single Suricata alert, which is the one that we pivoted in on. And then from the Falcon side, and that one, it said PowerShell Empire, right? So observed using PowerShell Empire. On the Falcon EDR side, we see a bunch of PowerShell OS credential dumping, a bunch of things that probably isn't a good thing. And depending on the organization, that could be compelling enough. You have 2 separate tools with 2 high fidelity alerts. That might be enough, right? When you get into the response mode, for me, it's not. I need to know, is this a false positive or not? Do we have something? Maybe it's a vulnerability scanner. Maybe it's something else that we're doing, and I need to rule that in or out.
When you got your EDR and your NDR telling you this, like that's
Yeah. So you could just be an org that says that's bad, and I'm gonna nuke and pave it, right? This is the host. What are we looking at? 102. We just nuke and pave it. But Patrick, a DC is not as easy as a nuke and pave. And what caused that intrusion, right? If you nuke and pave this host and all the other hosts, how'd they get in? And are they still in? How can you cleanly move from a respond action to recovery if you don't know if they're still in your environment?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is, I see where you're going with this because this, NDR really kind of started off. Early NDR products, network detection and response, were kind of put together by incident responders who were sick of going into environments over and over and again and having to manually collect all of this network data to divine some insights from it. So they said, why don't we just build something that does that so that, if we do need to respond at a certain place, all of that data is there in one place. It's searchable. There's a bunch of operations you can do on it. So, that's exactly what NDR is built for, is exactly this type of situation.
Yeah, and it's really powerful because it's passive, right? I'm not in line. I'm taking a copy of that traffic, and I'm going to tell you something's bad with that, and the attacker doesn't know that it's there. With EDR, they're going to know because they're hitting those hosts, they're on those hosts, they're getting blocked by those hosts. And there are ways to bypass EDR. There's ways to privilege escalate around them. If you got credentials enough to get above, you can just disable them. People are rebooting in safe mode. Now with Windows has Linux subsystems and Android subsystems, people are finding ways to use that to circumvent things. And you can't do that on the network layer. This is happening, right? Yeah. This is happening whether or not they've disabled a EDR on a host. So
yeah, I mean, we've always... The term that I like is ground truth, right? That's what you get out of that network data. And EDR is great. And when it's configured right, all of the things that you described are going to make a lot of noise. I guess the problem is customers aren't always monitoring.
Well, and I did threat hunting for like 3.5 years on network traffic and orgs. And every single time, I'm not saying I'd find something bad, I'd always find bad hygiene, but I would always find a host that the org is unaware even exists.
I mean, that was my next thing that I was just about to say, which is that, you know, it's not always configured correctly. In fact, finding, you know, universally correctly configured EDR is rare.
Or even fully deployed, because you don't know the host is there to deploy it on. You're never going to deploy it because it doesn't exist to you. But the network knows.
So anyway, look at us sitting here just agreeing that, having NDR is useful. But anyway.
So real fast, I just want to jump in on one of these where if I'm going to validate if this is a positive or not, the nice thing about having the EDR, the strength of an EDR is you get all the process calls, right? You get the opportunity to see everything coming from them. So all I did is I found one of the giant logs here. I can show you real fast. Just a bunch of nonsense base 64. A spoiler alert, it's base 64, but there's a bunch of encoded stuff. And with an EDR, you have the ability to go through and see every call and everything it was doing. And, if this wasn't a pen test or a red team and you have things like this flying across your host, you've now hit the response, right? We've now said this is no longer a false positive. We now have a response period. So what do I do with that response period? Typically, I need to create my blast radius. I need to know everything I can about that external host. That is, what did that compromise? Did any other host talk to that external host? And then we don't have time to go into all this, but each internal host and all the things it talked to, because if this host is affected, if Patrick's machine is compromised, what else did he talk to? Because now they're in scope of my response.
And the thing is, right, you can put that together without NDR, right? You can, by doing deep mining of really nuanced, like Windows logs and stuff, you can often do that, but it's so much harder, right? Like that's the point with network. It's just right there. And it's very obvious what's happened. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Yeah, except for, and I'll get to this at the end, except for things like OT and ICS, EDR is not going to help you because there is no way to install an agent on that, right?
No, but I mean, in this case where you're talking about Crowdstrike saying, whoa, something's crazy's going on here, and then you've got, network logs to kind of confirm that, there would be ways to investigate the blast radius without NDR. But it's just going to be a real pain. Like it'll be much more painful, I guess, is the point I was getting.
We're going to touch on that at the very end about how painful that could be.
Okay.
So, and I just did a quick pivot here. We first looked at I think this is the 102 host. So I would narrow in, this is the exact same host we're looking at. I'd narrow in on these hosts and I would look at where it was going. And in this case, this is my bad guy, right? I have a 3.86 address, which we have validated is not a false positive. I would want to know anybody who ever talked to that, and I would know anybody who ever talked to this FQDN. We got an info@cbanalytics.org. Those are very compelling, and why I would do both is because this could have rotating IPs or could have different subdomains. You wouldn't want to just do a single IP because it could be changing based on DGAs or other things.
I remember when it was cool enough and cutting edge enough when attackers were doing this that it even had a name, which was Fast Flux DNS. Remember that? Back in the day when it was...
I was just in generic IT at that point.
Yeah, it was funny, right? Because it's an obvious thing, right? Which is you set a low refresh time and cycle through IPs to sort of obfuscate response. Like people have been doing that a long time. But it was, I thought it was funny at the time because it seemed to be a pretty obvious thing that an attacker would do. But everyone was like, giving it marketing terms like fast flux DNS. But anyway, go on. Sorry.
So we've narrowed in on this one of this 3-dot address, right? This is our bad actor. Yeah. This is our attacker. And all I want to know is every host that's talked to it. So we got a 103, 102, and a 100. So that's as of now, my scope for internal. 103, 102, 100. We already know 102 is bad. That's the DC that got wrecked. And by the way, if that was the case, probably game over anyway. You're already dealing with DC. But I'm leading somewhere with this 100, I swear. There are additional subdomains. There's an info and there's a meta in here. So the nice thing about network traffic is you're going to get both of those. We have DNS records of everything and where it's going. So the 103 is not really that compelling, but for sake of time, I'm going to skip it. The 100 is super interesting because as we see a bunch of Suricata alerts and notices coming from 100, we see nothing on the Falcon side. There's nothing on the Falcon side. And that's because there's no agent on there. This is an attack campaign that is a compromised HVAC system. They came in through compromised HVAC system, and you can't put an EDR on that. There is no way to. And yes, you're going to see pieces of that attack hitting the things you have EDR on it. But let's say we're trying to go into the recovery, right? We're trying to clean up and make sure we're good. Could you definitively say, even now we know the 100 is there, like, because we saw it attacking the EDR, is there another thing in the environment that they potentially are sitting in doing something else? How can you
we
say
know that like often these HVAC systems and the like are maintained by external parties, and God knows why they don't VLAN them, but seriously, they often don't, right? And this is what happens, right? And it's all well and good to say, well, we don't need this because we don't have, un-VLANed HVAC systems on our network. And to that, I'd ask, are you sure? Are you really sure?
Let alone some are just terrifyingly outside the firewall. But we'll digress. We'll move on. There's clearly some bad security practices out there.
Well, and just quickly too, I mean, what this is showing too is not just which hosts the compromised host spoke to. This is showing which hosts are now talking to bad domains outside. Like this is a 5-alarm fire at this point.
Yes. And I'm not like a huge believer in Intel because that's the pyramid. It's not a pyramid pane because it's not 3D, but at the bottom's the IOCs, right? Like the hashes and the IPs. Good attackers are rotating those. But if you saw detection like this and had that is a very strong intel that I would want to look across all my devices and maybe even share to certain people or entities because if it's still ongoing, it is very relevant intel.
And just to be clear, again, it's something I alluded to earlier. Doing this sort of investigation, if you have NDR deployed, is a matter of, doing some pointing and clicking and putting some stuff in a search box. Doing it without NDR is a nightmare, like a proper nightmare.
Yeah, I have done it. I always call it the spreadsheet of hell. You start creating a spreadsheet of all the things and you're getting into switch configs to validate a MAC address to a host and you're
grabbing raw logs and it's not a good time. Yep. It is not a good time. Yeah.
Right. So the power of having both, right, to identify that blast radius as quick as possible, huge fan of, and to know I'm actually clean, right? Are they really eradicated from my environment, or are they just going to do this again slower and lower to try to evade, right? Are they really out of my environment? What I'd like to do now is pivot and look at the exact same data set we're looking at, but in our investigator tool to show you some of the value add. So you have your own screen as we covered. Let's help you enable to make that actionable and impactful for reducing your investigation time, dwell time, and making sure they're legitimately out of your environment and incident response. And then here's some additional things that we can make it easy because it's kind of purpose built. Do you need to have our investigator? No. Some orgs will not use it at all. They just use their own. Some will use our investigator and just export alerts. They'll send the alerts to Splunk or some other place. And then they pivot back in because they don't want to pay for the data in their SIM. And that's a legit thing we can get into another day. Probably don't have time to cover that. So we're looking at those exact same hosts. And what we kind of stepped through on those the alerts that we're going through is most of these high level ones. The nice thing about this is on the other screen, I was the one who said, let's go click on PowerShell Empire because I know that's not great. But some analysts don't. They don't know that that's not great. They don't know why they're clicking on the first thing or second thing, or did they do their query right? Is that even the first thing? They don't know. What we have is this curated alerts with a score and actionable items. We call it our Corelight Day One. Here's the things that we release to you to make it as actionable as quick as possible for high fidelity, significant alerts. Obviously, you would want to tune further to make that match the type of traffic you're seeing. But instead of going and saying you need somebody who's senior to go, let's click on PowerShell Empire, let's go click on attack discovery, attack execution, credential access. We have that list to go, and you're not trying to go and look at the wrong things in the wrong orders.
Yeah, I mean, staffing, we'd like to think that all analysts who are going to be sitting in front of this, have 20 years experience and understand the nuance of all the alerts, but they just don't. Like, that's not the world we live in, and it's not their fault either. I mean, there's a lot of new people in this game.
A lot of turnover, and sometimes, and unfortunately, some of it's bad, and some of it's actually good. When I was doing the SOC, we had some high turnover, but that's because we were promoting people because they were good to other places, threat hunting, incident response, etc. Yeah. So yeah, there is, punching tickets is a reality. You get this coming in, you got to work that, see if it's a false positive or not, and then do something with that, right? Are you escalating it? Are you nuke and paving? Other. So I'm glad you mentioned that quick, turn of people, and we were thinking about that, and we came up with how's a good way to actually use like an AI module instead of just slapping in AI and saying everybody has AI and moving to the next thing. What's a powerful way that we can make this impactful for SOCs and analysts? And we came up with this. This was a Suricata alert I narrowed it on, so it's past the high level that we looked at before in the Logscale. Now we're looking at the next detection down, which was a 6, and this is a service command, and it's a Suricata alert. We will bring that Suricata alert to you, and unless you're super nerdy, you don't know what this means. I've taught classes. I was a trainer. I taught classes on how to write rules and read rules, and it gets complicated quick. What we did is we took ChatGPT and we said, hey, can you just go ahead and just explain that in simple English to people? So instead of trying to understand this and even the regex inside of it, what does that Suricata rule mean? Right? And
yeah, I mean, look, I'm a huge fan of this. I interviewed your chief executive about this when you introduced this feature some time ago. And, I'm a bit of a sort of, large language model skeptic. I don't think they're as, crazy as everyone seems to think they are. But I think for this sort of stuff, right, like explaining things to people when you're just sitting on this huge like pile of, different signatures that can fire. And as you point out, like understanding what these are firing on, what it means is something where getting an LLM to explain it to a SOC analyst is a great idea. It's a terrific idea, right? Like it's such a good use of a large language model. And the thing is, even if the LLM gets it wrong sometimes, and I understand that in your case, it's actually been very, very good. But even if it were to get it wrong, like you're still ahead. Like it's a great use of the tech.
Yeah, one thing we have going for us is because we're banked on a lot of open source things, they're out on the internet and they're trained on those things. That's in the data set. So that helps us a lot. And then there was a lot of tuning and engineering to get the prompts to give us good results.
Yes.
Right.
And then but we salute the documentation nerds who all documented this stuff correctly so that the LLM is actually giving good output. We salute you.
Correct.
Documentation gnomes. Yeah.
100%. So the comparison is instead of needing me to say, let's determine that blast radius, let's see if this is a false positive or not. What are those steps? Well, it's just going to start telling me, all right, listen, you looked at Suricata and got an alert, but let's pivot into a Zeek log. That's that open NDR. Let's get in from the Suricata alert. Let's go look in Zeek. Based on that alert, it was SMB. You might want to go look at the SMB log. You might want to look at mapping. And you don't need as much of that level 2, level 3, you can help turn the level 1 into a level 2 by just providing them easy information that they don't have to go Google everything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think this is great. I really do.
And then at the end of that, what do you want to do with that? Is this I'm going to go ahead and assign that to my IR person, my senior person, or, maybe they have an external workflow like ServiceNow and you can ship it out to them using something like that. So I covered Zeek, notices and I covered Suricata. Really fast, I want to pivot and just discuss like some additional things that we have. So Zeek notices and Suricata. We have search-based alerts as well. So that's your typical query. You write a query to something that's high fidelity, and then I want to get alerted on it. I don't want to go find a thing I found. I'm a huge fan of that, especially for threat hunting. You find something that's impactful, narrow it down, quit hunting for it, get an alert for it. And then,
I mean, just to be clear though, for people who might be uninitiated, I mean, this investigator that we're looking at here, you're showing it, we've got some detections over here in Crowdstrike. Let's pivot over and like deep dive on it. You can just use the investigator too as like a standalone NDR, right?
Correct.
Like if you wanted to, you're going to get, you can set up detections, you can set up like, hey, I want to be alerted on these sort of rules or whatever. And then you can just have this, on a screen somewhere and bang, you're up and running with NDR, essentially. Yep. But I'm guessing most people do it kind of the way that you've been demonstrating, which is that they're pulling that data somewhere else and then using the investigator for the deep dives. They're less using this as a standalone. But some do, right?
It depends on the org and the size of it and how much they love their SIM.
Yeah, but I mean, SIM is a large org thing, right? Like if you're an SME, look, in the CrowdStrike example, like there's plenty of SMEs who are going to be running tools like CrowdStrike where they might choose to send their Corelight stuff over there. But there's also going to be some SMEs, I'd imagine, that would just, they're not going to have SIM and they're going to run this standalone.
Yeah, or you have a SIM and you love it very much, but to ingest a bunch of data from EDR or network is too expensive for you. So then you send it here and send the alert so you get your alert in your typical SIM, click on the link, drops you back here to do your investigation.
Yeah. So, it's so funny watching you tiptoe around not wanting to say Splunk charged like a herd of wounded elephants, but that's really what we're talking about here, which is dumping all of your Corelight data in Splunk. It's going to be expensive, so you're probably better off just, pumping out the alerts and keeping the data here. I get it.
Just to pivot on that, we have spent a lot of time figuring out how to tune things for Splunk to make it better for them, like compression levels and transforms and lots of ways to try to get a good outcome for our customers.
Yes. Yeah.
So
it's crazy though that like just so much engineering work in this industry goes around to like minimizing Splunk ingest. But anyway, that's a whole other topic for another day.
Right. So I'm going to go look at the tickets that were assigned to me. These are things that people have escalated to me, right? Beyond that investigation said, all right, James Pope, I need you to go and tell me false positive, not false positive. And I want to pivot on one of these that is our machine learning. We're not going to go through the full investigation, but I want to just point something out here. So yeah, this is one of our machine learnings. We're going to go into this detection and we're going to drop into, we have the same description, significance, that same level up for our analysts, but I want to go into one of these alerts. I've worked with other tools in the past that had machine learning, and the best ones that I came across would have like this type of scoreboard. Hey, this thing plus this thing plus this thing, and doing these together in this situation equals bad, right? It gives me a score. What I love about the way we did this with transparency was we provide the data. We don't just have the scoreboard and say, average entropy of rare NX domains is 11% or point whatever to equal ties up to 100. No, we know that here is the mean and here's where it deviated from that. We have, based on our traffic, this thing is an outlier. Based on that, with this one, especially that's way off the chart, equals bad. So you don't just have to take our magic machine learning word for it. Here's the data. And by the way, any one of these, you can actually go pivot into the data. You want to go validate something? Let's go validate that data all the way down to the same thing we were doing a second ago. You want to go look at the IP source desk. You don't have to magically...
Well, I mean, it's good that you're sort of classifying on a limited number of features here, right? Because if you start looking at some of these machine learning systems for doing stuff like malware classification, you couldn't do what you just showed us, right? Because there's just too many features. And you would be scrolling that page for a long time looking at little red and green bars. But I guess with network, it's simpler, right?
We have entire teams dedicated to working on different ways to make impactful machine learning to NDR. And we have a lot of really cool ideas and some they're about ready to push. And we already have a bunch that are out. So the answer is there's some cool things we'd like to do. And there's always a cost and how much data. And do you have the resources? And our goal is to not just say AI machine ML solves world problems. It's
Yeah.
here's where you apply the AI in the right place. Here's where you apply ML in the right place. Here's where you do a standard search-based alert. Here's where you do a Suricata notice. Like the right thing for the right job is way more impactful than just AI solves everything.
Well, and having some observability here is a really good thing, because I think even some vendors that offer this ML stuff, they kind of eventually lose insight into how it's doing its classifications anyway. So this is, great.
Right. So there's one more I want to pivot and talk about, and that's to tie it back to the beginning when we first started and we said, here's your sensor, deploy it where you want. The last thing I want to cover is cloud, right? We have some options that help end users and analysts in ephemeral devices. Cloud is constantly building, destroying, and then you end up with an IR scenario. And if all you have is your firewall logs or your net flow, like traffic, basic traffic flows, you're losing a lot of that visibility. It's going to say, this is Patrick's IP address, but tomorrow that's now James's IP address because that has been destroyed and is a new box. Or it was this department and now it's over here, or whatever. Ephemeral devices that are constantly being built and destroyed. So I want to narrow on that one next. Actually, I do want to point out real fast, just because I got it. We have these small alerts for things like a .zip domain, which it really does exist in this data set. But if it was like a .biz, we would know it's very bad, because no business in their right mind would ever use a .biz. They would be too risky to do that.
Except us. At risky.biz. Yes.
I just had
it's funny, like it has caused us problems having a .biz domain over the years, which is, I think we're the probably the most allow listed .biz domain on the planet, because I think we're one of the only legitimate ones.
So to get into this one, and we have a sliver detection, which is a framework to connect to hosts. We have our related detection. So anything else that this host got, any other notices or alerts or machine learning, anything else that was seen with this host is all packaged up right here. There's a S3 exfil that's happening off this host. There's various ones. One of them that sticks out to me that I'm always interested in is reverse shells. I want to go look at them, see what's inside of them. So I'm going to pivot into this reverse shell. This is a fascinating attack campaign that we could go a lot of directions. There's SQL dumping that we have SQL logs on from a cloud host to an on-prem database that they exfilled, brought it back to AWS, and then they sent it out through S3, and we got visibility into that. What I would like to do is pivot into one of these logs right here on this reverse shell. And we're going to get a little nerdy here, and a little bit of a back end of Zeek, right? So we have all these, these detections that came in, and then we have this UID. And the UID, if people are familiar with Zeek, that's a way that stitches all of our Zeek logs together. So we're just going to grab one of those, add it to our query up top, blow everything else away. And what this is doing is it giving me a single spot of everything with that session. We have also stitched in Suricata to it. So if I were to bring in like the path, and the path is the type of logs, we have Suricata, a con log, and an etc viz. The con log is our connection log. That session, that connection, everything together is this con log. That's what generated this UID. So I want to narrow in on that. I did a bad query there. I want to narrow in on that con log and look inside of it. So again, beyond just basic firewall, NetFlow, all the additional things that get provided from country to if you're next to the MAC address, here's your MAC address. We even have NetOps pieces built into there. If it's a full SYN, FIN packet that a lot of people use for NetOps. What we also have is these extendable packages in Zeek, and we use those to create these out-of-the-box enrichments that you could just turn on like an AWS enrichment. The value of that is if you're going through an incident response and that ephemeral device has turned and burned on you, well, I still know its instance ID name. I can go in my AWS, look it up. It was stopped on Tuesday by Patrick, right? He killed this. And further, I can even just see what its name was, whatever you named it, Patrick's EC2 instance. I know the department in a lot of the situations, depending on the tagging of that organization. Most are pretty good at this in AWS. But I usually will know.
So this has got to be, like, this can't be just coming straight off network capture, right? Like, this has got to be in addition, you're ingesting something from AWS through an API or whatever.
Yep. We're pulling some bits from AWS. That is correct.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw S3 exfiltration, I'm like, well, you're not going to see that on the network because you're not in line with it because it's S3, it's over there. So yeah, I figured it had to be some sort of API integration. You know, I spent a lot of time in front of Snort like 20 years ago, and it's just amazing seeing how far this has come. And I should also point out too that with a lot of this stuff that you've shown us, you know, the fact that there's so much encrypted network traffic these days is neither here nor there, because so much of the insight here is just looking at, you know, stuff happening. Like the thing that was spinning me out was the, you know, the connection, like getting the whole session there and being able to drill down in that. Like it's immensely powerful, right?
Immensely powerful. Even in there is still, unfortunately, there's still a lot of unencrypted traffic that exists. And especially in cloud, I don't know, whatever reason. I remember, you know, way back in my security days, initially it was like, let's have a hard perimeter. And then we allowed email and internet browsing, and like, we got to make layers. And orgs have got pretty good at that to various, you know, degrees of success.
Degrees, yeah.
Whatever reason, cloud is like, it's like a snapshot in time. It's like there's a hard perimeter, and the moment you get inside, it's like wide open. Is that because people don't understand it? Or bad implementation?
Look, everything's changing, and identity is the new perimeter, and it's all about API calls and stuff. You know, weird OAuth authentication is like the new code execution. Like it's all. You know, let's not try to wrap our heads around it right now, because it'll make us crazy.
Yeah, the point on that is that you put a sensor inside of your cloud, and it is a lot of unencrypted stuff flying around in there. Yeah. Should it be is a great question. But there's a lot in there, and orgs don't know it. They don't know it. They won't know if some of these things are happening. So having that.
My point is, some people think like doing network interception and like this sort of stuff in a world where so much traffic is encrypted is, you know, it's not useful because there's so much stuff encrypted. But you don't need it to be, you know, especially when you're integrating. You don't need to do full like packet inspection and see stuff in the clear. You know, like if you're doing an integration with EDR logs, you know, you see some EDR alerts and then suspicious connections flying out of a box. You don't need to see the content to know that that's bad, right?
Right.
That's all I was getting.
We do packet threat hunting at Black Hat, and you would think there's a place where there's not this internal infrastructure other than our reg systems, and we still get a ton of value from network visibility at a conference where everybody's just going north-south. A ton of visibility. We have blog posts on it. Feel free to go to Corelight blog posts and read all of our blog posts from past Black Hats. This is within the last year. Still very powerful, still very relevant.
Yeah.
What I did here, just to finish it out, we have the option. We call it smart PCAP. Instead of PCAPing everything, you have the ability to PCAP what you want. You want all unencrypted traffic? Great. You want to have all traffic around alerts? Great. One of my favorite is all unknown traffic, right? So analyzers from Zeek are pretty good. They're going to get most of the internet of normal traffic. When attackers or sometimes internal apps doing weird stuff, the analyzer might not match on it. And when that's the case, maybe I want to PCAP that. I want to know what's inside of the thing that I didn't get the rich metadata from it. So in this scenario, we have a PCAP on this. So I just want to pop that open real quick. We tied this in for this example into WebShark. It's an open source thing in the web, but our customers could stick that on local storage with login. They could put it in an object storage for the PCAP or whatever they want. Again, it's your data. Where do you want it? And just to do a real quick follow TCP stream, we have libps. And if you don't know here, let's just Google it. If I wasn't an analyst and I don't have the ChatGPT here in my smart PCAP, you could just, you know, do the old school, DuckDuckGo it, right? Lin, Ps, and go look at their GitHub repository. Like if you didn't know what something was, here's a privilege escalation thing that was used in this environment.
Yeah, right.
So meaning PCAP, and especially from my experience doing this, when you want it and need it, it's typically is rolled off because it's expensive. It's a lot of storage to put somewhere. And so if you can do that by smart triggers, much more impactful. In some orgs, just start with your crown jewels. What's the thing that's the most important to you? Just PCAP that thing. Don't try PCAPing guest Wi-Fi and your whole everything. You're gonna have a real bad time. Do it around alerts. Do it around unknown traffic. But I was
going to say, like a lot of the time when people bust out the PCAPs is when the 5-alarm fire is happening, right? Like that's when you really need it.
But there is nothing like having that source of truth. Like this isn't just
before you know about the event. Yeah, no, I'm with you. Like if there's a smart way to do that. I remember years ago, NetWitness and whatever popped up and they were just doing full take of everything. And, that was great, but geez, it required a lot of storage. And these days, like doing full take is just not, achievable. They did some interesting stuff back in the day with doing crunching on network data to strip out metadata and whatever. And they'd do full take, hold full take for a little while and then ditch it and gradually crunch to metadata. But, like this is unquestionably, where we are now with NDR is it's Corelight,
And
we've had the different phases. We had the snort era, we had the this era, that era, and now it's the Corelight era, the Zeek era.
We're trying to pick the best things of all those things, right? There's a time when I do want a PCAP for a thing, but it's too expensive to do everything. So I wasn't planning on this, but I load up, this is our sensor. Here's where you can pick your levers. You want source, you want dest, you want order of operations, you want to do all just Suricata alerts, you want to pick a depth on each one, like you can do that. You want to pick Suricata because it has really good detections and a lot of material on the internet for people to tune them. Wonderful. Let's take the visibility of Zeek, let's put those all together, and let's legitimately try to help organizations improve their security posture.
Yeah. Well, I think, James, that's a good place to leave it because I think anyone who's watched this demo over the last half hour or so would, be well aware by now that Zeek is, your sort of NDR collector of choice, right? Like, I don't think it's a controversial or overly promotional thing to say that Zeek is the community standard for doing this sort of stuff. And of course, if you want to buy some pointy clicky tools, who better to buy them from than the people who actually make Zeek? So that's the, your sort of investigator product there. It's been a real pleasure to chat to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. It's been wonderful to have here. And you need network visibility, ping us, man.